Welcome to the podcast summary of Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. Today's story is about a movie that took a fairy tale everybody knows and asked a very specific question. What if Hansel and Gretel grew up, stayed angry, and turned witch hunting into a job? It was loud, bloody, deliberately ridiculous, and a lot more successful with audiences than with critics. And somehow that gap between messy reviews and real box office is a big part of why people still talk about it. Tommy Wirkola's whole hook was to pick up after the Breadcrumb House story, and imagine the kids as adults who never really got over it. So Hansel and Gretel become professional witch hunters for hire, and the movie leans hard into that idea with a medievalish world full of pump-action weapons, Gatling guns, insulin injections, and whatever other anachronistic toy it feels like grabbing. It's not trying to smooth those contradictions out. The mashup is the point. The backstory gives all that mayhem a family mythology too. Their mother turns out to have been a powerful white witch, their father abandoned them to protect them, and the siblings' whole career path grows out of trauma, rage, and a very unresolved relationship with witches. That's what gives the movie at least a little emotional engine under all the exploding heads and flying body parts. Wirkola described the movie as a hybrid of Sam Raimi, Peter Jackson's Brain Dead, Tarantino, The Matrix, and Bourne-style action, which is honestly a wild sentence and also a pretty fair warning label. He wasn't aiming for a tasteful fantasy redo. He wanted a crazy rock and roll R-rated ride. That attitude shows up in the world building too. The production avoided locking the story into one exact historical period, so the setting feels more like a timeless storybook fever dream than a place on a map. You get leather and linen costumes sitting next to retro-futuristic weapons, with goth and steampunk touches layered in. Even the witches weren't meant to feel elegant or mystical. They were designed as more animalistic creatures, modeled in part on things like wolves, which helps the whole movie feel a little meaner and grimmier. One of the more interesting parts of this movie is that, for a major studio release with a $50 million budget, it leaned heavily on practical effects. The witches flew on wires instead of just being built in a computer. Edward the Troll was an animatronic suit operated by multiple performers. CGI made up only about 15% of the visual effects. That choice wasn't just nostalgic craft talk. The idea was that if the blood, creatures, and impact felt physically there, the movie's gonzo violence would land harder. And for a movie like this, grounded is a funny word, but it does matter. Rubber wires, squibs, and prosthetics can make even silly material feel tangible. There was a downside, of course. Famke Janssen's prosthetic makeup for Muriel was apparently extremely restrictive, with about 3 hours to put it on and another hour to take it off. That is a real commitment to looking nightmarish before breakfast. Paramount actually tested both an R-rated cut and a PG-13 version, which makes sense on paper, because studios always wonder if toning things down might open the doors wider. Wirkola fought to keep the R rating because he believed that once you reduced the gore, you stripped away the movie's identity. And according to the test feedback, he was right. The R-rated version played better. That's one of those cases where the movie knew exactly what it was selling, and trying to make it more respectable would probably have just made it blander. The reviews were rough. Critics gave it 17% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 23% on Metacritic, which is about as close as a score gets to an audible wince. But audiences were much more forgiving, giving it a cinema score, and the box office told an even clearer story. The film made $226.3 million worldwide against that $50 million budget. So whatever critics thought, plenty of people were absolutely willing to buy a ticket for a fairy tale splatter movie with attitude. That divide isn't actually that mysterious. Some movies are trying to be polished and acclaimed. This one was trying to deliver gore, action, and a knowingly silly B-movie vibe on a big studio scale. For the people who wanted that exact meal, it delivered. A big part of the story is how much stronger the movie played overseas than in the US. By March 2013, it had earned $205.9 million internationally, including $24.1 million in Brazil, $19 million in Russia, 14 million in Mexico, and 12.8 million in Germany. That kind of international response helped turn it from a weird one-off into the kind of movie people defend with real affection. Its cult status comes from the same things that made critics bounce off it: the unapologetic violence, the tongue-in-cheek performances, the cartoonish action, and the fact that it never pretends to be a prestige fantasy. Supporters tend to like it because it knows it's silly and commits all the way. There's a lot to be said for a movie that doesn't spend 2 hours apologizing for its own premise. Given the financial success, especially overseas, a sequel announcement came pretty quickly in 2013. Producer Adam McKay even said they could jack it up a level with different kinds of witchcraft and an even more extreme concept, which sounds exactly like what a sequel to this movie should promise. But then it started losing momentum in the very familiar Hollywood way. Werkela left the director's chair in 2014. Jeremy Renner became less certain about returning. A proposed 2016 release came and went. There was also talk of a television adaptation in 2015, and that never materialized either. So the franchise plan basically dissolved into a pile of announcements, half-steps, and maybes. What's left is this strange, sturdy little cult object. A studio movie that got hammered by critics, made a lot of money anyway, and stuck around because it understood its own brand of chaos. Hansel and Gretel didn't exactly build a franchise empire, but they did manage something harder to fake. They became memorable. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.